When gear matters. That's the title of this video, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. And also I'm going to review a monitor. It is the Andycine T6, this one here. So first, let's just get into the whole thing of gear, because yes, this has been talked about before on many different channels, but I just want to give you my version and my opinion on the whole gear thing. Some time ago, a man by the name of Christopher Yadisberg said that gear didn't matter.
I'm Christopher Yadisberg. It is my belief that what you do with your camera is the biggest thing. Do you know how to use it? Do you know the ins and outs? Do you know how to create a story that's interesting? Now, if you don't know at all how to use a camera, and you don't know how to get the most out of it, then gear doesn't matter.
Okay, I made all that up. I don't know who said it, but somebody said that gear didn't matter. And when they said that, the person hearing it took the straw man argument and they said,
are you saying that gear doesn't matter at all? Because without gear, you can't shoot anything.
And that completely misses the point of the saying gear doesn't matter. When the person says gear doesn't matter, it doesn't mean that they're saying gear isn't needed and it doesn't matter at all. What they're saying is we're putting too much emphasis on gear, and because we're putting too much emphasis on gear is causing us to not be creative, and we're putting all of our attention on the gear. So when I hear the phrase gear doesn't matter, that's what I interpret that to mean. I'm not saying that gear doesn't matter at all. That would be foolish to believe that. After all, we need gear, and we all know that. At least sane thinking people know that you need gear to be able to shoot something. So when somebody says gear doesn't matter, they're obviously not saying that it doesn't matter at all. I just want to get that out of the way. So the question then becomes, so when does gear matter? Gear matters when it prevents you from doing something that you need to get done. And that's why I'm talking about this monitor today, the Andycine T6. So you might be asking yourself, why do I need a monitor? Well, I'm glad you asked. You may not need a monitor. You may be fine using what you have. You may be fine using a flip out screen. You may not even use a screen. You may just look directly into your lens and you do your presentation or whatever it is that you're doing, and then you just upload it and that's it. And it's simple. And for some, that's fine. But if you're in a position like me or thousands, possibly millions of other people, where you're sitting behind the camera and you need to see what's going on, like what's on the monitor here, then having an external monitor is going to be very, very, very useful. And that's why I want to talk about the Andycine today. So the first question may be, why do I need a monitor and how's it going to benefit me? Well, one of the biggest benefits is just the size of the screen. More than likely, if you have a DSLR camera or a mirrorless or whatever you have a tiny screen that flips out. And that screen is okay for when you're shooting something, but when you're sitting behind the camera and it's maybe 5 feet away from you, it's very difficult to see details. And it makes it hard to frame up your shot because you got to keep getting up, sitting down, getting up, sitting down, adjusting it, especially if you're alone and you don't have another person to actually help you. This can take minutes, 20, 30 minutes, just getting the shots right or your lights right. You're trying to make sure there's no shadows here and make sure it's not clipping and doing all these things based on this little tiny screen. And then when you start to put information on that screen, that just gets in front of the picture. Things like your histogram, audio meters, focus, peaking, all these things start to cloud up the screen, and then you just really can't see what you're doing that well from 5-10 feet away. So that's when a monitor like this, the Andycine T6, comes in handy. The second thing is the monitor typically will give you some features that your camera doesn't have. So you might be saying, well, what features could a monitor give me that the camera doesn't have? Well, let's say you want to power another device. Well, a monitor like this, you can put your battery in and you have an 8-volt output on the back. So you can power other things. Or you may have a situation where you want another monitor that's wireless like this. Well, you're gonna need HDMI out that goes into a transmitter. But if you don't have that on your camera or an extra one, well, this monitor has that. Let's say you're shooting vertically and your camera is going to be very difficult to see because the screen is going to be rotated. Well, there's a 1/4-20 mount on the bottom that helps you to mount this vertically as well. So that's just some of the physical features that it gives you. Some of the other features that a monitor can give you is things like false color, histogram, focus peaking, and the list goes on and on and on. And some cameras have these, but a lot don't. Like, let's say you have something like the Sony ZV-E10. The Sony ZV-E10 is not going to have something like a waveform monitor. And this is very important if you're worried about your exposure, or even like a RGB parade if you're trying to worry about your white balance and getting your colors accurate. All of these things matter. And then another thing, that if you have something like the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II and you're shooting in 10-bit, well, what if you want to look at your footage and you want to have a LUT? Well, if your monitor supports LUTs, then you can actually see what the final picture looks like with a monitor. So these are some reasons why you will want a monitor. And I'm going to say that if you're doing this anywhere near professional, or you're doing things for clients, then having a monitor is almost a non-negotiable thing. You have to have a monitor, especially if you want to make sure your shots are framed up right, to make sure that your focus is where it should be, to make sure that your client can see what you're seeing. They may want to hold this thing remotely and watch what's going on behind the scenes, and you can just hand this to them and they can hold this and look at it and see exactly what's going on. And I think things like this are very, 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 very helpful when you're in the professional world. And even if you're not in the professional world, just even sitting here right now, for me, I can check and I know that my focus peaking is on. I can see that I'm in focus. I can slide up and I can see that my exposure is where I want it to be. And all these things are very helpful. So where does the Andycine T6 come in? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Andycine T6 has a lot of features, and one of the biggest features that I noticed right off the bat is how slim it is. This thing is really lightweight and it is really slim, and it is actually made out of aluminum. So this isn't plastic, this is aluminum, so it's going to be pretty strong. Now, just to put it up against my iPhone 6, not 16 yet, it's coming, but the iPhone 15 Pro Max, this is how thick that phone is, and this is how thick the monitor is. And you can see right here, they're not too far off. Now, as far as the size goes, it's not that big of a difference either. It's just a little bit bigger. So essentially, this thing is the size of your cell phone. Now, of course, we don't have a battery in the back, and that's gonna make a difference once you put a battery in. But if you're trying to maintain a lightweight setup, so if you have something like a Sony ZV-E10 rig that you're building, a monitor like this is going to be great because it's lightweight and it's not going to be super heavy. Now, you can add monitors with bigger weight, but once you put the battery on there, depending on what size MPF battery you choose, it's going to add some weight to it anyway. So let's go over some of these things. So let's say you're shooting in 10-bit S-Log3 and you're shooting in a color space of S-Gamut, and you want to see what it's going to look like on the monitor. Well, this monitor supports that because it does have 3D LUTs. So just know that that's an option. In addition, you have a waveform. This is very crucial when you want to get a look at your entire picture to see if you are overexposed or underexposed. Now, the way this works is you don't want to go below this bottom line down here, and then you don't want to go over this line up here. If you go below this line, that just means that your picture is underexposed. If you go above this line, then that means your picture is overexposed. So this monitor does support waveform, which is something that a lot of cameras don't have, especially like your Sony ZV-E10s and things like that. Now, one of the other ones is exposure, histogram. You can zoom in and out. You have a grid that you can have on here. You have false color, which is very important. You have your vector scopes. You have peaking filter for focus. You have the image flip. So if you have your monitor mounted a certain way so that the cables are oriented so that it goes into your camera easier, you could flip the whole screen, and then you don't have to worry about your monitor not matching the way that it fits best for you. And then you got embedded audio, which we talked about before. If you run an HDMI cable in here, now you can plug your headphones in and you can listen live and monitor your audio. And I think that's just pretty good. You also have anamorphic mode as well. Now, if you are not into monitors and things like that, and you're going, well, I probably won't use all those things, that's fine, but it's still a good idea to look into a monitor like this because you might use it later. You may grow into it. And the good thing about the T6 is it really isn't that expensive. Now, I recently did another review with the Andycine A6 II, which is this monitor right here, which is completely wireless. And the reason I like this a lot is because it has the ability to connect accessories to it. like this HDMI receiver right here. This wirelessly transmit video from my Atomos Ninja directly to here, so I can see exactly what I'm doing, and I can keep an eye on everything as I work. Now the T6 here does not have that accessory, it just has a battery. So if this is something you're not going to want to use, then you can always go with this one. Again, this one is lighter, it is smaller, and this is just for if it's going to be on your camera all the time, you're going to be shooting other things, maybe weddings or events. This is a great monitor to have because it just doesn't weigh a lot. You have your battery release here, and it's just good to go. So let's just go around this monitor here and just take a look at some of the options you have here. So starting with the front, you have a nice screen. Now, one of the first things I'll say is the screen on this monitor is very shiny. And what that means is it reflects. So when you're in a place where you have a lot of sunlight, then it can be difficult to see monitors like this. But I'll put all the specs here. You'll see this has enough brightness to actually overcome that. And then in addition to that, it actually does come with this hood here that you can put over it, and that eliminates that problem. So just so you know, you do have that as an option. Now, the other thing about this, if you look on the left side of the monitor here, is going to be your HDMI in, which is where you're going to plug your camera, and then your HDMI out. So this is for if you want to plug something in like another monitor, maybe like a bigger monitor where your people can take a look and see what's going on. They usually call that Video Village. Or you can connect something like an HDMI transmitter like the one I have here on this. Now, again, you don't have that connection, but if you want to connect an additional output here, you can do that. In addition, you can also power this thing a few different ways. You got USB-C on here, you have this regular barrel connector, and then you have the NPF batteries here. So you do have 3 different options. Now moving to the bottom here, you have 8-volt out here. So this can power other things as well. You also have a 1/4-20 mount. So this is where you can mount it on top of your camera, on a tripod, or any other thing that takes 1/4-20 mount. You also have your headphone jack here, so you can plug a pair of headphones in here to monitor. Then you also have your Type-C power delivery. So this is 5-volt here, so you can charge the monitor this way as well. And then moving on to the right side here, this is another 1/4-20 mount. So if you did want to mount this vertically, you can do that, and I think that's pretty neat. And then moving to the top of the monitor, you have these 7 buttons up here, and these 7 buttons just are different functions. So you got F1, F2, F3, your exit menu button, your down, your up, and your power button. Now these buttons can be configured, these function 1 and function 2 buttons, to do whatever it is that you want them to do. So that's really pretty much it for this monitor. It's a really basic monitor, but again, it does a lot of what you're going to find with most monitors, but it does it at a price cut. Now, being that it is a cheaper monitor, it doesn't mean that the quality is cheap. It just means that the price is cheap, because so many companies now are coming out with these monitors. It makes things good because it drives the price down. But let me know, would you use this monitor to build a Sony ZV-E10 rig with? I'm gonna go over a rig that I have here, probably in another video, or if you have questions about it, just leave it below. But until next time, I'll holler at y'all later. I'm out. Peace.